So good morning. Today aims to gather us in the present to talk about events that have occurred in the past, not too long ago, and ones which we will continue to witness in the future. Welcome to Fault Lines, a student-led symposium which will focus on conversations around earthquakes, disaster knowledge, legislation, and rebuilding. An earthquake, unpredictable yet inevitable, does not have to be destructive. However, recent incidents prove that without correct preparation of infrastructure legislation, this does not hold true. As we witness the aftermath of major earthquakes around the world, we want to come together to discuss and speculate on our position as students and academics and practitioners in a moment of crisis. What is our agency? A year ago, we began the process of the symposium by organizing a discussion together with one of our tutors, Kieran Malik, among other relief efforts, such as a bake sale and a week-long donation run. It was exhilarating to see how quickly we could come together as a community and how powerful our conversations were in a time of great tragedy. And so with Fault Lines, today we do not aim to find solutions to the topics discussed, but rather we aim to encourage discussion to question the wider system of an earthquake. And before we begin, we would like to thank all of our speakers for joining us, Managing and Harriet for helping organize everything and being the backbone of the organization team, the AV team, Photius, Pascal and Darko for their help, and also Sirkane Darkroom for the prints you can see in that corner, which are available for purchase. And to support Sirkane's cause, as I said, you can take a look at the prints. And further information can be seen on the explanations next to the prints.
So this is the morning session. The day will be divided into two, the morning and the afternoon. And in the morning session, we're going to discuss disaster knowledge, legislations, and community resilience in earthquake zones. Through the day, we're joined by guests who will present their work and answer questions about it to shape conversation, and then the floor will be open to any other questions and points from you guys, the audience. Again, we don't aim to find solutions, we only want to provide and encourage conversation. And now we're joined by Tuğra, Ağrikli, who graduated from the AA with RIBA Part 1 diploma last year and also won the writing prize for her paper, A Twofold Displacement. And also Dr. Estella Carpi, who's a lecturer in humanitarian studies at the UCL Institute for Risk and Disaster Reduction. Her academic work has mainly revolved around identity politics in crisis-affected settings, anthropology of the state and humanitarianism, and the overlapping of welfare and emergency relief. And also online, we will see later, is Dris Ketani, who's the founder of Dris Ketani Architects and focuses on the place, the culture, and the inhabitants as an essential starting point for his projects. He gives importance to local needs and their spatial requirements while building, and he will share that in his projects as well.
Okay. Hello, everyone. On the 6th of February 2023, 7,584 buildings collapsed in southeastern Turkey. Earthquakes happened twice, first with the families inside, then with the snow on top. In the days following, the rising amount of loss, a number so inconceivable, was justified by the asserted conception of the earthquake as fate, destined to happen and independent from human intervention. Today, I'll argue the opposite. Jean-Luc Nancy defines an event by its way of being a shock, a surprise. Depending on sets of conditions, an event can be only titled as such if it escapes our rational grasp and proves our assumptions wrong. In the epicenter Kahramanmaraş, the assumption was of the inhabitable house, the permanent home, and the place to live. On dawn of 6th, the wall thought to be owned came to light with the paint and the crying drawings remaining on the exposed facade of the adjacent house. Our assumption was proved wrong. No one owned the house, the streets, or the lives lost. The flats recently invested or rented in to trust to their guaranteed durability and compliance with the earthquake building regulations were shown to be not dwellings. Our assumption was proved wrong, and the event appeared in the number 7,584. Histories of each life condensed into this concrete count.
memories became anonymized and could only be fathomed through an abstraction as such. I know that the scale of the event might mislead one to disposing of the ample conditionality of it. Yet today, I'll be underlining the two conditions that I find had a prevailing role in the process leading to the forming of the debris of the earthquakes, called enkaz. These are first, the construction of the houses on state lands of disallowed zones, or with the disregard of building regulations, hence leaving blocks of flats entirely defenseless when faced the major earthquakes. And second, the state of remaining, obliging of the incompetent to build structures or alterations to such by way of declaring amnesia through the legislature of the Turkish Republic. The latter of these two prerequisites will be of deeper investigation in this presentation, and we'll start with the first instance of amnesia of written history happened in Athens to follow its trace to the present states of the affected cities in the Kahramanmaraş earthquake. In 403 BC Athens, a crowd burst into tears for a poet staged the capture of Miletus. He was fined for 1,000 drachmas for recalling them to their own misfortunes. And they likewise made the law that no one should ever exhibit that piece again. This city, Athens, where the historiography starts with Herodotus in the form of first-hand memory, became the host to an early proclamation for the forgetting of our tragedies. The misfortunate event was seen to be brought by a search for revenge, emphasized on an inadequacy by inducing the grief of the Athenian crowds, so it was banned by the Senate. The first written instance of amnesty laws was born out of ordered amnesia, the outliving of the things remembered that cause us agony. Although closely intertwined in time, the use of the term amnesty diverged to sit in an opposite side of its origin. In contemporary legal structure, amnesty in a sense alludes to a proposed contradiction with the laws, a forced replacement, or a supplantation in the constitution. This recognized definition can be met with two contrasting adoptions of the term, one of which stands against the adamant structures of law and their practice to achieve justice before the illegitimate uses of these legislations. This case is to be exemplified by the activities of Amnesty International. When the performed legal structures are deemed corrupted, amnesty then serves as a force of savior. It is advocated either against misemployment or the negligence of these laws. The case differs when the context in which the parliament, as a representative of the followed legal structure, is the one to instigate amnesty. When the laws prior to granting of pardons are trusted on to be effective in the long term, and perhaps this is the reason why the parliament is not seeking a permanent modification in the constitution, yet is still disregarded by a cursory interruption, then amnesty induces a response of skeptical defense, for it becomes a deliberate choice of post-authorization. Amnesia of Athens and Kahramanmaraş earthquake crossed paths in 2018 with an omnibus bill presented in the Turkish parliament, covering a range of pardons aimed for the debts owed to the government. The omnibus bill included the zoning amnesty, a retroactive law to exempt illicitly constructed buildings from demolition and or discharge related fines with the construction's permanent certification in the building registration system. The legislative history of zoning amnesty in Turkey presents a fairly chronic case of forgiving since its first application in 1948. In time, by their scheduled nature, amnesties not only become responsible for their own consequences, but also for the implicit conventionality previous amnesties made possible, as they cede the expected tolerance of future violations. By the use of amnesties, any breach of codes committed by contractors, in Turkish müteahhit, meaning the one who promised and undertook responsibility upon an agreement, and other responsible parties were legalized upon any incompetent construction, causing their unsolicited predominance over engineers, architects, and other complementary professions of the industry. When stripped from their sole function, contractors deviated to act as estate developers, as the profit-making and savings from material purchases became the primary motivation of constructions. The promise contractors held of the habitable house was overruled. Then the reprieves of the past paved the way for the carefree practice of future offenses. In this way, with time, the rupture of the architect from the art of construction got realized by the hand of the state and its most patriot contractor. Then the question that must be asked is, why is it necessary to implement amnesties? Why do governments forgive, rewrite, especially when it is known that this rewriting is fragmentary, but is constant as well? Although so embedded to its history, the implementation of zoning amnesty took a sharp increase from the 1980s by the remodeled financial strategies of the Turkish state. And Ceren Arkildırım wrote that through such strategies, the government has further encouraged inclusion into the market through a cost-benefit calculation about the future, chosen over the defense of an existing setting. I believe that the term calculation hints at the existing of possibilities, of risks, and also decisions. So when momentary revision of the laws are chosen over in-place regulations of inspection, of control, supervision, or registration, you in fact risk a destruction. In 2018, a number was included in the statement given by the Minister of Environment and Urban Planning for one of the three advantages of zoning amnesty. The number was 50 billion Turkish liras. It was told that the treasury wins and the citizen legalizes their own houses or workplaces. When the buildings that were deemed unsafe or the ones that were not inspected for their structural abilities could be legitimized and become newly registered to state records, then the previous losses in taxes caused by the anonymous flats could be prevented as well. Yet the number offered was in fact merely a result of an optimistic estimation. The ultimate gain harvested from amnesties was less than half the anticipated, with the concomitant loss of over 100,000 lives in the earthquakes. And I need to emphasize that the case of amnesty is not exclusive to past natural disasters either. It is not a critique of hitherto decisions. Its nature obliges for a systemic miscalculation that must be done over and over in reliance to the anticipated interests. Here, the monetary cycle is predestined for perpetual sustain, and the event happens on the foundations of amnesty's opportunist quality. In Athens, 1,000 drachmas of a poet, or 7,584 buildings in ruins, they all become the counted memorabilia of what remains. For Athens, it's the cost of a voice, and for the southeastern region, it was a bestowed silence. Inevitably, amnesties presents a lawful crime, for its own conclusion is nothing but a foreseen massacre. In the aftermath of the earthquake, 351 people were arrested from around 2,000 of suspects. 310 of them were contractors and site managers, 23 were building owners, and remaining were subjects of uninformed alterations to the structures. And there is no information on how much of the collapsed blocks were excused for their violations, or whether any of the arrested responsibles benefited from previous amnesties. But I think that these are the questions that highlight the intricate quality of any aberration from our legal structures. The displacement within the Constitution initiates the agonizing evanescence of the tangible. It gets multiplied twofold. Nicolaou argues that in the context of Athens, such a forgetting leaves traces. And I have to agree that remains persist. They persist despite an amnesing instinct. The trace of the zoning amnesty, the forgetting of the laws once painstakingly committed, is not just made of the miles of concrete dunes or the replacement tents that have been inhabiting the surviving families for a year now, but also on the collective memory of a generation. Last year, Earth became concrete and water became snow. Amnesia brought the memory for once never to be forgiven. Thank you for listening.